Howdy, I'm Fess Parker. If you ever want to feel really important sometime, try walking into a chicken yard with a sack of feed. That's a fact. The longer you live on a farm, the more you realize that the animals act just like people, especially the chickens. Take a rooster, for instance. He struts around the place like he owns it, and you really can't blame him. A long time ago, a lot of folks had a superstition. They thought if a rooster didn't crow, the sun wouldn't rise. You know something? I'll bet that old bird started that story himself. But no matter how you feel about it, there's one thing you gotta say for him.
Every time a rooster crows, everybody surely knows it's a bright and early morning on the farm. When a horse begins to yawn as the day begins to dawn, you can tell it's early morning on the farm. When a pig climbs out of bed, he's anxious to be fed. It takes a rooster's crow to start his day. And every turkey knows that when a rooster crows, it's time for them to get up and go gobbling on their way. When the cow begins to moo as her day begins anew, it's a bright and early morning on the farm. Then the rooster crows again, just to wake up every hen. Then they know it's early morning, a much too early morning, a bright and early morning on the farm.
Yes, sir. You've got to admit it. A rooster's a mighty important bird around the farm. You could just about call him a feathered alarm clock. I know around here we all depend a great deal on old Gaylord. That's what we call him. That's him over there with that stack of hay. Now, I don't understand how he knows that it's time for the sun to come up. I guess you might say he just works by instinct. And when he's feeling pretty good, you can hear him crowing for miles around. Sometimes he starts off a little too early, and then I'm liable to get a few complaints. But he's worth it. Why, can you imagine what would happen some morning if he decided not to crow? Well, here, let's let old Gaylord tell us all about it.
Can't you imagine what would happen if a rooster didn't want to crow? Why, the little hens would keep on sleeping, and there'd be no more eggs, you know. Oh, there'd be no more baby chickens. Before you could stop and think, no more romance, no more babies. Chickens would soon be extinct. So there is one thing we all know, that a rooster better crow, better crow. Yes. He's gotta get up
In the morning,
at sunup.
in the morning,
He hops on the fence
in the morning,
and crows.
in the morning,
He hates to get up,
in the morning,
but he gets up.
in the morning,
He can't stay asleep.
in the morning.
He has to get up and get going. The pigs are not eating.
Get up, get up,
The sheep are not bleating.
get up, get up,
A rooster keeps bleating.
get up, get up.
Because he knows it takes a crow for them to go, go, go. He's gotta get up
In the morning,
at sunup
in the morning,
and crow.
in the morning,
And crow.
in the morning.
Well, anyway, after old Gaylord crows, that's a signal for all of my white leghorn hens to get busy. I've been pretty lucky with these gals. They're mighty ambitious as far as hens go. While they're working, you can hear them gossiping. They sort of remind me of some friends of mine. Now, the minute they're through, all the hens come racing out of the coop and gather around Mercedes, that fat little hen in the middle there. She's sort of the unofficial scorekeeper around here. She lets them know how well they've done.
Oh, we started off right this morning. On each little nest was a hen. Only 23 chickens laid 24 eggs. Oh, girls, we've done it again. Oh, girls, we've done it. Oh. And the farmer will love us all dearly. On that we can all depend. 'Cause of 23 chickens laying 24 eggs, he'll know we've done it again. Oh, yes, he'll know we've done it. He'll be surprised this morning. Oh, a smile will brighten his face. He'll count the nest and count the eggs. Now, who could have said such a praise? We really were with it this morning, weren't we? Not one of us tried to pretend. Oh, bless me. For when 23 chickens lay 24 eggs, you just know we've done it again. For when 23 chickens lay 24 eggs, you just know we've done it. Oh, we've really gone and done it. We've gone and done it again.
There's one skinny little rooster around here that I kind of worry about. He's not as big as the other fellas, and they sort of leave him alone. He tries, but he just can't keep up with them, and, well, they're too busy crowing to be bothered. But it's the hens that really give him a bad time of it. Whenever he tries to be friendly, why, they chase him around the yard until his legs are so shaky he can hardly stand up. Then they laugh at him, and the little guy heads for the silo. A sad-looking rooster, to say the least. See? There he goes now. Whenever he begins to feel sorry for himself, he goes into the silo and begins feeding on the sour mash. Then a strange thing happens. He seems to change.
Tiger, 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 tiger. That's what I am. That's what I am. That's what I am. That's what I am. I'm mean. I'm mean. I'm mean. I scare girls. I scare girls. I scare girls.
Lord help them if I should ever crow. They'd go to pieces, they'd go to pieces, and if I should ever let them know, they wouldn't be so facetious, they wouldn't be so facetious to let them know that I'm their king, to let them know the real me. They would fall on their knees and try to please the king, the king, the king, that's me.
A tiger, 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 tiger. That's what I am. That's what I am. That's what I am. That's what I am. I'm mean. I'm mean. I'm mean. I scare girls. I scare girls. I scare girls.
Lord help them if I should ever crow.
You know something? I don't think I'll ever forget the day I had to put up with 23 jealous hens. You should have been around here when I put a fancy feathered little Bantam chicken in with the rest of my white leghorns. It was like lighting the fuse on a keg of dynamite. The hens all hated her from the moment they first laid eyes on her. She made them feel like a flock of feather dusters, and they didn't like it. But with the roosters, it was something else. They followed her around the yard like she was a walking bag of chicken mash. They even staged crowing contests trying to impress her. She was the most popular chicken on the whole farm, and the rest of the hens knew it. They'd watch her strut around the yard with all the roosters tippy-toeing after her, and before you know it, they began to spend all of their time in the coop. They'd cackle and mutter to themselves about the state of things, but little Miss Fancy Feathers couldn't help it. As a matter of fact, she tried to tell them that.
I can't help it if I'm pretty. Don't blame me if I'm a doll. I can't help it, I'm a knockout. I can't help it at all. If my face is simply gorgeous, I can't turn off all my charm. Don't blame me if I'm the prettiest, most adorable chicken here on the farm. I try to be the simple kind, to be like all the others, but instead of being the simple kind, I wind up with the mothers, husbands, and their brothers. I can't help it if I'm darling. Don't blame me if I'm so sweet and your guys start falling at my dainty, darling, adorable feet. You see, I can't help it. Really, I can't.
Well, this just made matters worse. The hens chased her out of the coop. They wanted no part of her. And Miss Fancy Feathers really didn't care. She knew she'd done her best, and if those hens didn't want to be friendly, why, that was all right with her. It was all right with the roosters, too. They continued singing their crowing songs to her and acting like she was the queen of the roost. Then a funny thing happened. The younger hens began to get quite friendly. Yes, sir? Those little pullets began to imitate her every move, or at least they tried to. They'd follow her after the little bantam, and no matter what she did, they'd try and do the same thing. It was obvious to me that they were out to impress the roosters. And you know something? I'll be doggone if Miss Fancy Feathers didn't give them some pretty good advice.
If you have in your mind an idea that you want to catch a man, listen very closely, my dear, and I'll tell you of a most effective plan. You gotta shake a feather off your hip and give it everything you've got and really flip. You've gotta build up a storm that could sink a ship by shaking a feather off your hip. You gotta keep your shoulders really straight, and if the top starts to jump, let the bottom wait. You've gotta get on the beat and forget you're adrift by shaking a feather off your hip to carry further my plan of attack. You gotta move your sacroiliac, and don't forget to stay on the beat, even though you might have 2 left feet. You gotta shake a feather off your hip and give it everything you've got, then really flip. You gotta get on the beat and forget you're adrift. Start shaking a feather off your hip, off your hip, off your hip.
You know, just like any single fella, there comes a time in a young rooster's life when he wants to settle down and raise a family. And I suppose it was only natural that he'd pick the prettiest gal around. But a funny thing, little Miss Fancy Feathers refused every one of those birds. No matter how they crowed and carried on, she ignored them. You never saw such a bunch of disappointed roosters. I think every one of them was hoarse for a week. Even Gaylord, the loudest of the whole lot, could hardly be heard. There was one fellow that came a-courting, however, that didn't give a hoot for the little bantam. He sneaked into the yard one night and walked right by her and into the hen house. He didn't give Miss Fancy Feathers a second look. But then, he was a weasel and preferred a fatter hen for a bride. For as Mr. Weasel himself puts it,
the bride of my dreams must be tender. At breakfast, a delight to see. Yes, at breakfast, I want my darling sitting there at the table with me. At lunch, I'll come home just to be near her. How consumed with desire I will be. A fragrant and tempting sight to behold as she sits at the table with me. That's my idea, a colossal idea. That's my idea of a bride. A grand idea, a stupendous idea is my idea of a bride. When I bring a friend home to supper, a blissful fine sight we will greet. I will serve a white wine, and she'll smell so divine, and she'll look good enough to eat.
well, one moonlight night, Miss Fancy Feathers did fall in love, and wouldn't you know it, with a rooster that was pretty hard to catch. I'll be doggone if she didn't fall in love with that gold weather vane up there, the one on top of the barn. I suppose with the moonlight glittering all around him, he did look like something special. It's not very often that a hen finds a rooster made of gold, and I guess the little bantam just couldn't help herself. She'd sit on the edge of the fence and stare up at him for hours. She was a mighty lovesick little chicken. But there was only one thing wrong. When the wind started blowing from the west, that gold weather vane would turn his back on her. It looked just like he wasn't interested. And then you should have seen Miss Fancy Feathers. Like to broke her heart.
Never before have I been ignored. Never before has a guy looked so bored. Never before, this is something new. I think I'm falling in love with you. No one before could have ever been cool. No one before could have been quite so cruel. No one before turned his back on me. How miserable falling in love can be. I never thought I would find a guy who's made of pure gold, someone that I could look up to. But why do you have to be cold? Never before have I felt such a slight. Never before, you're not even polite.
anyone could see that Fancy Feathers had a problem. She wasn't getting anywhere with that gold weather vane. Even Mercedes and the rest of the hens felt sorry for her. In fact, we were all quite concerned. But then I got an idea. The answer was quite simple once I'd thought about it. I put a little fancy-feathered chicken in the yard with her. Only this time he was a bantam rooster. He took a liking to Miss Fancy Feathers right away, but she didn't seem to be interested. The little fellow made a quick tour of the farm, and it wasn't long before he found out what was wrong. He knew that the gold weather vane wasn't real. Well, anyway, one night, with everybody on the farm encouraging him, the little bantam rooster proposed to Miss Fancy Feathers. We all waited to see what would happen.
When a goat goes for a goat, they go together. It's as natural as the stars above that shine. If you'd listen to my plea, you'd start falling in love with me. Oh, darling, won't you say that you'll be mine? When a mouse falls for a mouse, they go together. It's as right as anything can ever be. Everybody on the farm knows there couldn't be any harm if you would suddenly fall in love with me. My friends have all talked it over, and they all seem to agree. It's wrong when a hen says no, and again maybe she just can't see any future with me. When a turkey needs a turkey, they go together. Giving thanks for having their love, don't you see? If I had your love, you know, I'd give thanks and how I'd crow. Oh, darling, won't you fall in love? Try to fall in love, darling. Fall in love with me.
And you know something? It looked to me like they lived happily ever after.
When the cow begins to moo, as her day begins anew, it's a bright and early morning on the farm. Then the rooster crows again, just to wake up every hen. Then they know it's early morning, a much too early morning, a bright and early morning on the farm.